Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait maybe a minute or two to see if anyone else is going to join us, so sit tight. So I think we will go ahead and get started. My name is Stacy Nelson. I am currently part on the leadership team for the Healthy School Meals for All Coalition, with my position as president of SNA Wisconsin. Caitlin, do you want
You
to
want me to
introduce
introduce
yourself?
myself?
Yeah.
Very informal here. I'm Caitlin Harrison. I know many of you on the call already, but I am also on the Healthy School Meals for All Coalition leadership team, and learning all the ins and outs from the team from Stacy and Allison and everyone else on our leadership team, and the current president-elect for SNA Wisconsin. So thanks everyone for being here.
All
And I'll
right.
give a, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know if you want me to give a quick shout out. Hey everyone, Allison. I am with Reap Food Group, but also have the pleasure of working with Caitlin and Stacy on the Healthy School Meals for All leadership team. I don't see our other two members on, Jackie and Matt, representing Feeding Wisconsin and Feeding America, Eastern Wisconsin. But happy to have you all here. I'll turn it back to you, Stacy.
Great. So today, SNA Wisconsin is happy to bring you a meeting to hopefully help you guys um, reach out to your representatives. I know we keep talking about doing it, so we thought it would be helpful to give you tools to help you actually get there. So today we have Nathan. I'm I'm not going to say your name right, Nathan. Help me out.
Nathan Butzloff is the
Thank you. He is from Hoven Consulting. It is SNA Wisconsin's lobbyist partner. And he is going to share any legislative updates that are pertinent. And he is also going to share some best practices and effective strategies to get your representatives to hear you.
All right. Well, thanks, Stacy. Do you have a preference whether I start with the legislative update or the slides on advocacy? What kind of advocacy 101? Any preference there?
Nathan, you can start with whatever you feel is best.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we might be a little more logical to flow. The flow might be a little more logical with the slides here. Let's see here. Let me share my screen. Bear with me for just a moment. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Stacy mentioned, I'm one of the two lobbyists for the School Nutrition Association of Wisconsin. Tim Hoven is also is the other lobbyist here in Madison for SNA Wisconsin. So starting out, I just wanted to give you kind of an advocacy 101 as it's entitled here on the slide, kind of why you should get involved in advocacy in general, just kind of some general lobbying steps when you work with the legislature or when you reach out to your state legislator specifically. All right, I just want to give you a little bit of kind of a state government lay of the land first before we kind of move on. So first of all, as I'm sure you all know, Governor Tony Evers is the governor. He defeated Republican Tim Michels in 2022. It was a fairly close race, as you can see here. And as you know, his term ends next year, and he has announced over the summer that he will not want to run for re-election. I won't get into it here, but there are a lot of candidates for governor. A lot of individuals have announced their respective candidacies. I won't get into all the names and so forth, but it'll be a fairly active campaign going forward until the primary, which will be next August of next year. As I'm sure you know, Governor Evers served as state superintendent of public schools for 2 terms, and prior to that, his career really was really in education, a former educator, principal, and school administrator. So lay the land here on the legislative side, specifically for this current legislative session. The legislative session here in Wisconsin is 2 years, so we're currently in the year one of the 2-year legislative session, 2025 to 2026. So in the state Senate and the state Assembly, currently Republicans have majorities in both chambers. So Republicans have 18, Democrats have 15, and the Assembly it's 54, Republicans 45. Over the last, in the last election, there due to redistricting, which we'll get to in a moment, these majorities were reduced quite a bit, and particularly in the Assembly, Republicans lost about 10 seats, and Republicans lost, I believe, was about 4 or so seats in the Senate going forward for this or in the last election in 2024. So again, a little bit of rundown of who the leaders are in the respective chambers. So Speaker Robin Vos, he's a Republican from Racine County. He's the longest serving state speaker in state government history here in Wisconsin. He's been speaker since 2013. Majority Leader Tyler August, he's a Republican from the Lake Geneva area. And Minority Leader Greta Neubauer is a Democrat from the city of Racine. And in the Senate, Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu, he is a Republican from the Sheboygan area. And Minority Leader Diane Hesselbein is a Democrat from Middleton, so the kind of western Madison suburbs. So as I mentioned a moment ago, just a little bit of an explanation, and many of you already may be familiar with the redistricting. We kind of went through this, we did go through this twice in the last 5 years. Excuse me, there was an initial redistricting, and then we did have a state Supreme Court election that changed the composition of the Supreme Court so that the more liberal or progressive justices have control. Previously, it was conservative justices who had control for over 10 years. So with that change, there were some changes. There was a lawsuit filed, and it made its way to the state Supreme Court. And so in December of 2023, the state Supreme Court issued a 4-3 ruling to redraw the lines, the state Assembly and state Senate lines, specifically not the congressional lines, but the state legislative lines before the August 2024 primary election. So at that point, after the December 2023 decision, or ruling, I should say, the legislature passed a bill in February 2024 to change the district lines. Because if they had not done that, that would have bounced back to the state Supreme Court, and they would have effectively decided the legislative district lines themselves. So the legislature decided to do it themselves instead. That legislation went to the governor, and he signed it. And then, as I mentioned, that those legislative district lines have taken effect for it starting in January of this year. So who are your legislators? So to find out who your state representative, state senator are, just go to the interactive map at maps.wisconsin.gov and type in your home or work address. And I will, let me do this. I think it will cooperate with me. Let me just show you kind of what it looks like visually. I find this to be very helpful. So this is actually quite a better map than existed last legislative session, although the one last session was still pretty good. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can switch to imagery, sort of satellite imagery, topographic imagery, and so forth, Senate Assembly, and so forth. And you can also, this is kind of fun. I don't really play with this too much. The opacity of the colors here. All you really have to do is just type in your home address or the address you're looking for to see where who represents that particular address. You'll always have a state representative and a state senator who represents a particular address. Let me go back to the presentation. So I just want to give you a visual of that. One thing that's important to note, and this is something that is from our presentation we've put on for our SNA members, since they often will invite legislators to their respective schools for a tour. Just make sure that, particularly for those SNA members who are on the call, but also other folks too, legislators are very particular about visiting facilities, schools, what have you, that are located in their legislative district. There are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that's where they want to go. So, I'm not saying they won't visit a facility that's not in their district, but if you want to attract them, that's the best way to do that, to let them know that it's in their assembly district or their state senate district. So you can find that out by going to that interactive map and doing that search there. So a little bit of a primer on the legislative process here in the state legislature. So it's when legislation or a bill is introduced, or it can be a resolution also. It's introduced. Well, first of all, it's circulated among the legislature as a draft piece of legislation, requesting their fellow legislators to co-sponsor it. That period of time can usually last a couple of weeks. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay before it's actually formally introduced. That actually happens. They usually batch introduce them. The Speaker's office and the Senate President's office handle that. So most bills are usually batch introduced on one particular day. And they do that several times throughout the legislative session. They don't just usually do one bill at a time, but occasionally they do. After that process, it's referred to a committee of jurisdiction. And that committee chair can, if desired, can hold a hearing on the bill. Not all bills get hearings, since there are quite a few bills that are introduced. Um, and sometimes, the nature of the bill, the subject matter of the bill may not be agreeable to the committee chair, so that's also a factor as well. So once the committee has a hearing, it's a public hearing. Anyone can show up to Madison and submit either written testimony electronically and not come to Madison, or come to Madison and testify in person. A lot of these hearings, but not all of them, are streamed on Wisconsin Eye. So wisi.org is a very helpful streaming site. And I know if you have, I think, Charter Spectrum Cable as your cable provider, I don't know what the channel number is, but it's also provided there on the cable channel. Although the difference, though, is that if you go to the website, they'll stream multiple hearings at the same time. They can't cover every hearing just because the lack of camera equipment and personnel. They're not able to cover every hearing, but they do cover a fair amount of them. So if you're not able to come to Madison to watch that. And then the next step is after the hearing and the executive session is where the committee will vote to advance the bill out of committee or recommend approval to the full assembly or full Senate. It will go to, then the next step would be to potentially be added to a session day, what's called a session day calendar in the assembly or the Senate. Again, that's more of a leadership question. And in their respective chambers. It's again, not every bill that's reported out of approved or voted out of a committee will necessarily be voted on by the full assembly or Senate, but certainly some of them are. And then at that point, it would be added to a list. And then when there's a session day in the assembly or Senate, there would be a vote on that bill at that time. And then once it's passed in both chambers, both the assembly and Senate, it of course would go to the governor's desk to sign. And again, the process is kind of handled similarly. Bills are, for the most part, and there are some exceptions to this, most bills are sent as batches to the governor, usually at one time, and there actually are specific dates in the calendar that are used as batch dates, or not batch dates, but dates on which bills are sent to the governor. There are exceptions. Sometimes one-offs can happen, but generally that's how most bills get to the governor for his signature or for his veto. So I want to get a little bit more into advocacy and why it matters. So certainly government relations are critical to advancing the legislative goals of this particular coalition. And it's also important to reach out to elected officials at all levels. Now, certainly the focus here has been primarily on the state legislature. And certainly I think there's been some congressional outreach as well. But certainly, certainly your respective school boards and your respective school districts are important on the more local level. And there could also be some value in reaching out to your local governments as well, depending on the situation. And also just learning how to educate your state lawmakers and also, your elected officials on issues that are important to the coalition. So why does advocacy work? Well, so these are obvious points, but I will state them anyway. Your legislators work for you. You pay their salary. You decide if they keep their jobs on election day. But then the reality is they need information to do their jobs. They can't be. Some legislators will, as chairs of specific committees, they'll specialize in certain issues, certain policy areas. But even then, they can't know everything about every issue. They just can't. And that's where you come in as particularly for our SNA members, as school nutrition experts, as all of you as advocates for Meals for All and your respective industries and jobs. You're experts in your respective areas, and you're going to know much more than a particular legislator on those issues. So just remember that, bear that in mind when you talk to legislators or legislative staff. And also by providing that information to them, you help ensure they make good decisions going forward. So what is grassroots advocacy? Well, it's the act of many people, many individuals working as a group to communicate the same message to legislators, to policymakers, to elected officials. So how to become a successful advocate? Well, know who your legislators are. Going back to that interactive map, I think it's a very, very helpful map, and you can very easily find out who your state legislators are right there. If you type in an address, I didn't go through I didn't run through an example, but it'll pull up the little boxes with their names, their photo, a name, there are some very basic contact information and a link to their biography page, which provides even more information about them. So that's one way to find out, or maybe the easiest way to find out if you don't already know. And having some understanding of the legislative process, which obviously we're going through here, and becoming an expert on your issues. So, which, I mean, you already are an expert on your issues, right? This is what we're focusing on here. And ultimately, probably the most important thing is building relationships with legislators. If you don't know who your respective state legislators are, build relationships with them. And there's a we'll get into that. We'll get into how to do that here in a moment, but it's a great way to again, make a connection. And then ultimately the intention is obviously this will help you advocate for the issues important to the coalition, but also going forward, if they have a question about, school nutrition or other issues, they'll think, oh yeah, I talked to so-and-so, a couple of months ago, and I'm going to reach out to that person and try to get some information because I need to get some more information on this, or I have a question on that issue. So that's it. It makes you a resource, right? It makes you a valuable resource to them. And how to build a relationship. Well, there are different ways here, as you can see, to do that. Attending town hall meetings. Now, sometimes these meetings are not always in person at a community hall or community facility. Sometimes these are online. A lot of them are online. Sometimes they still do. You still have teleconference calls. You'll see that sometimes. They're different. That comes in different forms, but also particularly community events. I think you see that more probably during the summer months when it's warmer. Community events that are outside, whatever they might be, a festival or some other kind of event. They're often at those events, so that's a good opportunity to reach out and connect with them as well. And then what I put on respond to action alerts, that's something that I'm not sure, I'm not so sure if the coalition puts out action alerts like SNA does, but that's something that we do. And asking folks, hey, we have this issue here, please reach out to your respective legislators. This is how you find out who they are. Here's the background on the issue, that kind of thing. So why does grassroots advocacy work? Well, they care about your issues and they want to help because you are from the district, you are a constituent. That is one of the things we always tell folks is that the first thing when you reach out to a legislator or an elected official, the most important thing you can tell, one of the important things you can tell them is that you are a constituent. Make sure that you are. You go to that interactive website that I showed you here a few minutes ago. But that's one of the ways because they hear from people all over the state, frankly, all over the country on issues. And sometimes people don't always include their home address or what have you, and they're not always able to tell who's a constituent and who's not. And if they can tell you're a constituent, you provide your home address, you live in their respective legislative district, they have to respond to you. So just bear that in mind. And that's an important thing to include in any kind of communication to share that data point with them. And also you're active in your community big and being part of this coalition. And ultimately you vote and you can help reelect them. So how to communicate with your legislators? Well, there's obviously several different options here. Certainly email. I will say they get a lot of emails, and a lot of them are form emails. From my time working in the Capitol, working in Congress, that's pretty common. And it's also very easy to do. So the challenge is it's so easy to do. They get so many of them. How do you break through that in that messaging, right? So I often encourage folks to either do one of two things. So, well, I mean, you have a couple of options here. So if you send an email message, I would encourage you to, even if you have a template, try to customize it. Or if you can, if you have the time, to write a completely brand new message, original email message. Those kinds of messages do stand out. And certainly phone calls, because most folks they're so used to, they're getting on their phone, they're tapping something, they're getting on their PC or their laptop, they're clicking submit, they're typing in their name, their email address, and then they move on with their day. But if you have the time and you're comfortable with it, I would encourage making a phone call. They do get calls from constituents, but relatively speaking, the lion's share of messaging they get, contacts they get are via email. So just bear that in mind. And if you're able to come to Madison, certainly a personal visit is obviously very impactful as well. And then finally, of course, since in the last 5 or so years, virtual meetings via Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or what have you, those are often options as well to have a meeting with legislators. So we'll go through some do's and don'ts for contacting your legislators. So again, going back to my earlier point, please make sure to identify yourself as a constituent. Another option is, and again, I'm sort of going back to my experience with our SNA client or SNA members, is there can be a little bit of a difference there. So say, for example, you work at school XYZ, but you live, and that school is located in Assembly District 5, for example, right? But you live, 20 miles away and you live in a different assembly district. So what I would do is, you can certainly essentially have a twofer, is the way I like to look at it. You can contact your legislator who represents where you live, but then you can also contact your legislator who represents where you work. Because again, going back to the SNA example in a school nutrition tour, which we have our members do work on and invite legislators to, they're going to want to visit a school that's physically located in their legislative district. So you can essentially have that's two options. Again, I realize that's focused on our SNA members, but that's just one example. Also using personal stories. I've seen, it's very easy to kind of focus on kind of the bullet points and the data points of your arguments and your advocacy. And those are all important and valuable as well. But I've seen time and time again, telling a personal story, telling anecdotes, those kinds of things are very impactful. I know Caitlin Harrison. This is an example I always remember is that I think it was in a news article where you were quoted as a family that was just made just a little slightly enough or slightly more than the cutoff for the current free and reduced price meal programs. And so those kinds of, and obviously cannot identify the family and the student, of course, but those kinds of things are very impactful to people. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, you don't want to, we don't want to identify any individual, any student or family. You certainly don't want to cause them any embarrassment, of course, but just keep those kinds of stories or those kind of thoughts in mind. And also try to stay on message. It's easy to kind of, you're in a meeting, it's easy to get off on tangents sometimes. And a little bit of personalization of the meeting is fine at the beginning or maybe at the end, but just make sure you try to stay on message. And ultimately, please ask for what their position is and potentially for assistance as well. And we'll get into a little bit more of that here in a moment. And also, here's some don'ts. Don't discount staff. I've seen this many times where folks will come in, and we have various clients and we work in healthcare issues and energy issues as well at our firm here, and I've seen this a number of times where folks are frankly offended that legislators did not make time for that person. That's very common. Happens in Congress, happens in the state legislature. You might get staff. I've had meetings, not so much here in the legislature, but when I worked in Congress, I've had meetings in the hallway. It's that kind of thing is not unusual. Don't be surprised if that happens. That's not unusual at all. And that staffer will pass that information on to the legislator. And sometimes there are last minute changes that happens all the time too. Just bear that in mind that it's a very fluid place when they're busy. And that's just the nature of kind of the situation here. Again, try not to discuss unrelated issues if you can. A little bit of personalization in the meeting is fine, but try to focus on what the issues at hand. And try not to overreact or be rude to staff. Again, going back to if you get staff instead of legislators, that's a very normal thing. That's very normal. Don't try not to be bothered by that, and don't be intimidated. These are all regular people. They all started out somewhere else. Some of these legislators have only been in office for not even a year in some cases. And some cases have been in office for over 20 years. And some of these legislators or staffers are fairly young, and a lot of them are young, relatively speaking. And some of them haven't been around that long. Some of them have been around that long. So it really just depends, but they're all regular people. So just bear that in mind. So this is where I like to go through kind of what I call the anatomy of a legislative meeting. So we'll get to, this is kind of the four categories here, 4 steps, and we'll get into a little bit further here in the slides here. But the greeting, establishing credibility, explain the issue, and what the ask is at the end. So the greeting. So find a connection. So you might, the great thing about meeting with the state legislator is this is not going to DC and meeting with a member of Congress where you're probably a bit farther removed from them than you are from your state representative or your state senator because they represent a smaller amount of people here. Maybe you have a connection to them. Maybe your brother-in-law went to high school with this person. Maybe you go to you worship at the same religious institution. Maybe they're neighbors. Maybe you went to high school together. Maybe you know them personally. If there's some kind of connection you can make, that usually that can resonate quite well. Don't worry about it if you cannot make a connection, but if you can, that's very valuable. But again, try to keep it brief, and then also thank them for their service to the state. So establishing credibility. So what's your connection to the district? Going back to the example of, do you work in the district? Is your school, for example, for our SNA members, is your school physically located in their legislative district, or do you live in their legislative district, or maybe both? And their influence among their constituency. So obviously, as a coalition member here, you're going to know more about school meals and school nutrition, frankly, more than the legislator or their staffers are. So you already have that influence and having that knowledge of the issue as well. And then getting into explaining what the issue is. State what the issue is. Chances are you'll have what's called a legislative leave behind or a document. Usually it's a page, no more than usually 2, kind of explaining what the issue is. Discuss the key points. Try to keep it high level. It's very easy to get into the kind of the weeds a bit, the details. It's okay to get into that to a certain point, but try to keep it as high level as you can. And you can always come back and address any questions they may have after you go through the document or through the issue. And then give examples. And again, this goes back to telling stories, telling anecdotes. Those kinds of things are very, very impactful. And then finally, ask them, can you count on their support? This is something now, it's good to be direct, but at the same time, they may not be comfortable or ready to answer that. Some of them might be. They might just say, well, I'm sorry, I can't be with you on this one. Or maybe they'll say, this looks really good. I'm in support of it, or I've been in support of this for years. Or they may not want to give you an answer. So what I would suggest you do in that situation is say, well, would it be all right if I followed up with your staff and say a week or 2 weeks or something like that? And then set a tickler on your Outlook calendar, or however you do that. That's how I operate. Just as a reminder to yourself, in a week or 2 weeks or however long you want to wait, and then follow up with the staff, and then try to do that every so often. Don't you have to be it's a judgment call, right? How often you call the legislative office, to follow up with them. You probably don't want to do it too much, but you want to do it enough that they to know that you haven't forgotten about that question. So just bear that in mind. So I want to provide, here's a couple of examples. Our SNA members will be familiar with these. So I want to provide some examples here of kind of some email templates, and also what we call a legislative leave behind. So just bear with me here as I click on these links. So I don't know if you can see how I'm going to zoom here. Hopefully you can see this here. So this is this is an example of these are all examples of documents we've used over the much earlier this year and much earlier in the legislative session, advocating for the Meals for All funding, which was obviously included in the governor's budget request to the legislature. So this essentially was an email template explaining requesting legislators to support the governor's budget request of $147.7 million in this particular fiscal year here. So it gives you some points explain this is why it's necessary, this is why we support it, some data points here and so forth. But this just gives you an example of kind of how we approach it from the SNA perspective. Let's see here. Let me go back. Here we go. And then the next example here is kind of what I call an advocacy email meeting request template. So let me click on this and I'll show what I mean here. So this is an example of a meeting request. So coming to Madison and meeting with them, or it could be in the district too, their legislative district. You could be meeting with them there as well. That they do have meetings in their legislative districts as well. And this is a request for a meeting, but also specifically talks about the Meals for All budget request the governor has submitted previously to the legislature as well. So getting into some of that as well. So that's just one more example of that. And then this is more of a general kind of, and again, this is specific to our SNA members. This is kind of more of a general email template, just inviting them to visit a school for meal service, for a school, what I call a school nutrition tour. So having them come to the school, tour the school, tour the meal school nutrition facilities there, and also they almost always want to get behind the line, or at least it seems like they've always wanted to get behind the meal line and help and serve kids their meal. And this is really great stuff because they get photos of themselves. Then they end up using it on social media. They've got the gloves on and the hairnet or the hat or however it's set up, and it's kind of a great opportunity for them, and they usually really enjoy it. And again, this is specific to our SNA members, but this could potentially be used in other contexts as well, at other facilities. But this is something I think it's worked quite well for our SNA members. And then finally, what we call our legislative leave behind example for the Meals for All funding. So this is something that we put together. Again, this is earlier this legislative session. This kind of, again, this is one page, as you can see, high level, bullet points, headers are in red, logos at the top, and then what the budget request is, and then a contact information, which is Tim and myself if they have questions. So again, as you can see, keeping it high level, keeping it at one page, and then sort of bullet point format is easier to digest and to read. This is a helpful format I found to handle legislative offices. All right. That is my presentation. Happy to answer any questions you might have about advocacy.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can either ask them now or drop them in the chat. Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate that.
Of course.
It's nice to review that every so often and go through all the details and provide some tips and tricks. So I appreciate your knowledge there. Any questions about Nathan's presentation? Otherwise, I think what we'll ask Nathan to do is maybe just share some recent happenings with some bills, or a bill in particular that doesn't pertain directly to Healthy School Meals for All, but talks about food and ingredients. So we thought it might just be good information to share for the group because you are all passionate about food. So I'll let you take that away, Nathan.
All right. So one of the bills we've been engaged on is dealing with ingredients in school meals, so or additives. So there was a bill introduced earlier in the session here that I believe was 4 or 5 ingredients. I think red dye number 5. There were a couple of what is and the rest of the ingredients are all ingredients that are difficult to pronounce. Those ingredients. Um, and we saw initial draft of the bill, and we had meetings with the bill authors. So Senator Rich Corral Guevara, who's a Republican from the Appleton area, and then Representative Clint Moses, who is the Republican from Menominee. So sort of that would be east of Eau Claire on the I-94 corridor, if I recall correctly. Um, they've been active on this issue, and some of this has come out of, and Caitlin will be familiar with this, the Make America Healthy Again movement that's kind of come out of Washington. And essentially, their intention is to, ensure that school meals are healthy for kids. So our response is, well, we've already been the vast majority, if not all, school districts do not include these ingredients in their meals already as it is. However, we are supportive certainly of not including these ingredients in the meals. The way the bill was drafted, though, um, it would only have applied, at least originally as introduced, it would only have applied to public K through 12 schools and independent charter schools. So our response was, and then also I should say, the original bill also only applied to students who received meals under the free and reduced price meal programs, the federal programs. So our request was to, well, wait a minute here. This should really apply to all meals served in the school, not just the free and reduced price meals that are served to those students. And I realize my understanding, and all of you know, most of you probably know much more about this than I do, but my understanding there are some very strict privacy controls there. So folks don't know, so other students don't know that, those students are getting a benefit under those programs. So certainly you have to be respectful of that and compliant with that. So we explained that to them. And also our argument was, wait a minute here, you're banning these ingredients from public school students and from charter school students, but what about the private school students? What's going on there? This doesn't seem equitable. We really should be expanded to those students as well. So we'd had those conversations. They were very receptive. They were very open to hearing our feedback, which we really appreciate. And then initially the bill authors did introduce an amendment that frankly gave us those two, what we wanted, those two items. I think there was some internal, among the Republican caucuses, I think there was some internal conversation. And then there was a second amendment introduced that still would have applied it to all meals. So when I say all meals, beyond just the free and reduced priced meal program participants. So it'd be all meals served in a school, but it would sort of dial it back on the private schools. So it would only apply to those schools that participate in the parental choice program. So that was kind of, I think, their compromise on that, which I think our members had still had concern about that. Well, wait a minute, why can't we apply it to all? To be quite candid, there were certainly some political, as you can imagine, a political element to that. There are a number of Republican legislators who are certainly very supportive of private schools. So that's kind of where that led. And then last Friday, the Senate Health Committee approved Senate Amendment 2, which is the amendment I just referred to. So what I call the compromise amendment, for the lack of a better term, they approved that, and then they approved the bill as amended by that amendment. So, and they did it via get a little bit too in the details here, but they approved it via what's called paper ballot, which means there was no actual in-person committee meeting. They just do it literally via paper ballot. So there's no committee meeting to watch or anything like that. So that's happened in that committee. It was passed on a party line basis, 3-2. The Assembly Education Committee, to which this bill has been referred, is not. They both held hearings. We've submitted, I guess I forgot to mention that we both submitted written testimony to both hearings reflecting our priorities, what we want to change in the bill. But the Assembly Education Committee has not yet held what's called an executive session to essentially vote the bill out of committee as amended. So from what we've been told, that could very well happen. Probably when they can they'll do it. Typically, committees have those kind of meetings when they can vote on multiple bills at a time, not just one bill at a time. So I think that's part of a little bit part of the delay here on that side. But yeah, so that's for Caitlin or Stacy. Am I forgetting any? That's probably maybe more information than you want, but that's any additional elements that I forgot there?
No, that's great. I appreciate that. And yeah, we had a really robust conversation about that with SNA Wisconsin and our legislative team. Obviously because there's some impacts here, right? And so we had to talk through all that, but it was certainly an opportunity to connect with those folks who wrote the bill and hopefully establish a relationship as we go along. So any questions about that? I did put the link to the Senate bill in the chat box for reference if anybody would like to look at that. Otherwise, if there's no questions, then we're going to move on to our next guest speaker, Caitlin Tariainen. And I know a lot of you are familiar with her as she recently was on the Healthy School Meals for All Leadership Coalition team just last year. She's back at it. She missed being here. I mean, she's been here, but involved. So thanks for her to jumping in here. So our prompt here is, I've reached out to my representative and they said yes. Now what? Caitlin, you've got a lot of experience in this realm, not just statewide, but also federally. What are your suggestions for people if they're reaching out to their representatives?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I'm going to pick on, I see like a number of people on the call who have also had state representatives out. So if I miss anything, I'm going to pick on the rest of you to fill in the gaps for me. So um, I think my opinion is like, this is the exciting time, right? This is the time to shine. I think a lot of people can get really nervous about having somebody come out. But one thing I always like to think about is a lot of times they know nothing about our programs or what we do or what we serve or why we serve the things we do. I had I think it was last school year, towards the end of the school year, we had a new state representative out and just really had no idea of any of the programs that we did. So that was our opportunity to educate them and teach them the right things when they came out. Sometimes you're going to have people coming in who know a little bit about what you do or have misinformation on what you do, and really our job and our goal is to be their resource for the future. So everything Nathan said, try to find a connection, look into what motivates them. If you look on their legislative page, you can usually find what committees they're on, what their interests are. You can sometimes find how many kids they have and if they're married or if they're not married. Like, you do your research and you figure out, how am I going to connect with this person on this topic? So when we're talking about free meals for all, it might be a federal representative that we've spoken with who grew up on SNAP. And so we talked to this particular representative about, you know, these kids need to eat. And he'd say, yeah, I know. We used that program when I was a kid. I'm thankful for that program. I love that program. So just finding that connection any way possible and then showing your great things. One of the interesting things that we had a discussion about, some of the directors in the state here, and when I had a legislator out last year, was, what do we put on the menu that day? Which was interesting because we were asking for more money and we wanted to show the really cool things we did. So I thought, I might put shrimp on because we're going to put shrimp on the menu. And then I was like, wait a second, I'm asking them for money for food and then I'm going to put shrimp on the menu. So I actually dialed it back a little bit so that it wasn't like our over the top once a year menu item, but it was still something really cool and local and good food that we made ourselves. So just jump in, do it. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to disagree with you and you're going to have made that connection. And then you have to keep making that connection. I always go back to Mike Gallagher's office, and I know he was a federal legislator, but I made a connection with him, and actually there's a number of school districts in the area that did. So before he left office a couple years ago, we were out in DC, and it just came to the point where it was like not this super formalized email, because we had been in contact so many times over the years. I think I emailed him and I said, like, his name was Dan, it was his staffer. Hey Dan, we're going to be in DC on this day. Can we come see you? And he was like, yep. Do you guys want a tour of the Capitol? I said, yeah. So just making that connection and just being able to be friendly and professional, but like actually not just ask them for something all the time, and being available for them to ask you questions too, I think is the most important. I'm gonna pick on Mike Vandenbush because he's our SNA legislative chair right now, and I'm gonna ask him if he has any other advice. Mike comes at it at a little different angle than I do, which is so great because he's very straightforward about what he's asking for. I feel like I'm a little bit more reserved, but Mike's like, this is what I want, and this is what you need to give me, and I love to see that angle. So, Mike, I'm sorry, I'm picking on you.
Well, it's good to hear. So we actually have someone coming tomorrow, and I was taking notes on what you're saying. So, I've I've only ever had two at our school district. One of them, I think, the biggest thing that I always try to keep. I mean, you can get into the numbers and like pull out stats a lot, but at the end of the day, I think the shift is trying to make the perception of our program from a welfare program to a learning resource. And I just feel like that's everything that we talk about needs to be. I think that's how I just, whenever I'm discussing it with them, I feel like the first time I did it, I had like the meal cost broke out, the labor cost broke out, and I'm like, this is the problem. Don't you see it? Like, and I think that just like a lot of that goes over their head. But like if you can build the relationship and then kind of show why there's a problem with creating different levels, free, reduced, paid, and why not just provide it like a textbook to every kid? And I feel like that has been, I think, more eye-opening when I've talked to the two in the past. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's about building a relationship. Sometimes I feel like I need to probably when you say you're putting me on the spot, I actually feel like sometimes maybe I need to maybe like I can get pretty passionate about it. So like I think being able to like take a breath, create the relationship. You might disagree with this person because at the end of the day, everyone's trying to do what they think is best, except we're the right ones. But yeah.
Love it.
So I don't know if
Awesome.
that's really any advice for anyone, but take what you can.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you guys for sharing that. Does anybody else have anything that they would offer up? Maybe from an experience or maybe a question, a wondering? Okay. One other person I will pick on too, Stacy. Actually, Caitlin was referring to Representative Van Orden. That's who she was referring to when she said that there was a representative that has utilized meal benefits growing up, and that's who she was talking about. And you actually had somebody from his office out recently. Could you kind of explain how that all went down?
Yeah, I was just unmuting when you started to call me out. So, I have honestly been pestering Representative Van Orden's office at least the last 3 years for sure on a consistent basis. And they are always either gonna get back to me once they can narrow down his schedule, or he just doesn't have time. So I had planned Eat Local Foods Day. Gosh, what day was that? September 22nd, I think. And I, on a whim, was like, oh my gosh, why did I not email them about it and let them know? So we got all of our local produce from a farm, and we partnered with the Dunn County Dairy Farmers Union. So I know Representative Van Orden is a very strong proponent of local community farms. And so I told them about this day and invited them, the staffer and him, to come for lunch. And the staffer responded like that afternoon saying, "Yep, Van Orden isn't available, but I am able to come." And I could not believe it that they finally said yes. So he came, and then I invited the dairy farmer union rep to come as well. And so she came. I invited them for lunch. They got to see our homemade, locally procured tomato soup, and a grilled cheese sandwich for lunch with the fresh garden bar. And they honestly couldn't believe, or he couldn't believe, that it was school lunch. We just had a really open conversation. He was able to ask questions that he had about our meal programs, and I was able to be a resource for him and also share about my concerns that I had and explain why healthy school meals for all is so important. And it was really kind of fun because, unprompted, the dairy farmer union rep, she goes, "I don't have kids. I don't plan to have kids, but as a taxpayer, I don't have any problem supporting free meals for all the kids that need it." So I was like, that is perfect.
Amazing. So yeah, I mean, I would say both of those are true, right? So sometimes you're gonna get an immediate response from those folks, and sometimes you're not, and you're gonna need to be persistent. And I think it's okay to be persistent too, right? Make sure that they know that you're still there, like Stacy did, and it was a last minute request, right? But it worked out, and it was a really great opportunity. So great. So what I was going to do is ask or show you guys some resources from SNA Wisconsin, but Nathan did that previously. And we'll link those in the agenda, as well, so you guys have those as a resource. But those have been really great resources for myself as I was learning about advocacy and how to even broach those conversations. So whether it's a letter, even if you're just starting with a form letter and then making your changes to it, or turning that into kind of a script if you're calling, those are really good resources, and you can customize it to, maybe you're not in a school district, maybe you're outside of that. They're just good tools to utilize as a starting point. So I was going to highlight those, but Nathan already took care of that for me. So thank you very much. So those are all of our speakers today, and I'm going to let Allison tie it up with some updates from around the state and some other things. If you guys continue to have questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll answer them either here or on the agenda. So Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. And actually, I've got a question, probably more for Nathan, and I'm curious, some thoughts. So some questions that have come in from coalition members. They've said, I live in an area where both my representatives, my senator and my representative, already support healthy school meals for all. What can I do? And curious, Nathan, if you have any thoughts on, like, if someone's in a district that's already supporting healthy school meals for all, um, yeah, what they might be able to do to still continue their advocacy work.
Well, certainly, if they're members of SNA, say, for example, they could certainly work to reach out to other, I know there's, when they have, the SNA has various conferences and so forth, and you meet other SNA members in one place, meet members who are from another part of the state. Reach out to those contacts and say, hey, can you reach out to where your state rep and your state senator are, and invite them to your school, or and engage in advocacy, and I can give you more information if you like, that kind of thing, to kind of help replicate that as best they can. One thing I did want to add, just kind of generally speaking, this is a little bit more mechanical, but as far as inviting for a legislator for a tour of your school, for example, or a facility, and I covered this a little bit, I think, in our SNA legislative committee meetings, is typically Mondays and Fridays are the best for them, for state legislators, because in Tuesdays through Thursdays, they're either in that's when they're in Madison typically. Not to say they're always in Madison every Tuesday through Thursday, but that's when committee meetings happen. That's when session days happen, those kinds of things. And so Mondays and Fridays are the best for them, which I realize may not necessarily mesh with your respective schedules. And the same goes on the congressional side too. It's the same kind of deal. They're in DC Tuesday through Thursday. They typically fly back, Thursday night, maybe Friday morning. to their congressional district, and then they fly back to DC Monday afternoon or something like that. So, or maybe Tuesday morning. So those are your windows as well. It just this is kind of the nature of kind of how the scheduling works. But I just wanted to add that as well.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Much appreciated. As Caitlin said, I was going to share some updates, and if you're in the agenda, these are all linked. So just a reminder that October is here. It's starting to feel like fall. The colors are changing, and it is National Farm to School Month. And not only is it National Farm to School Month, but it is Farm to School Month and early an ECE month here in the state of Wisconsin. Governor Evers did a proclamation, and we've linked that in the notes today. A couple other reminders of or ways to celebrate it being Farm to School Month is the Great Lakes Great Apple Crunch. Now, this always happened on the second Thursday of the month, which actually falls today. But my understanding is really we want to be celebrating local produce and specifically local apples all month long. So whether you're in a school or your workplace, or you're at home as an individual, crunch into those local apples. I'm actually just coming from an apple orchard this morning out near Mount Horo. We purchased those apples for a school that we partner with. And so just, I'm going to be crunching into a local apple off camera here in a little bit, but let's celebrate National Farm to School Month and crunch into those apples. If you're in southern Wisconsin, just wanted to give a shout out to the Monona Grove Community Dinner that's happening next week. Maggie Santa is the school nutrition director there, and she is hosting a community dinner on next Wednesday, going to be highlighting local produce to celebrate October. And it is a free meal. And if you know folks in the Monona Grove community, certainly encourage them to come on out. I'll be there with some bike blenders as well as a fellow Madison nonprofit Rooted, who does garden-based education, are going to be there celebrating with the school nutrition team. And coming out from DPI, coming up in November is going to be Wisconsin Local Food Day, and we are going to be celebrating the state cranberry. So take a look at that and mark your calendar. A lot of different ways to enjoy cranberries, and yeah, let's have fun with that. And then you may be in the know, but there are two upcoming grant opportunities that we want to remind folks of. The USDA Farm to School grants are out. Now I know government shutdown, maybe playing into that a little bit, but there are resources. Or if you do need the resources or are looking for those, please feel free to reach out. But those are grant opportunities that are open, and I think those grants are technically due December 5th. And then the Spark and Innovation Collaborative Awards are opening up this October 15th, so next week. So keep an eye out for those opening up. And if you're someone who's looking to be involved in either of these grants and looking for other partners, whether you want to be writing the grant yourself or you want to be partnering with somebody else, and you're looking for those partners, please feel free to reach out. Happy to try to form those connections around the state. Both of these grant opportunities are really valuing collaboration between different school districts and different partners. So happy to help with those collaborations. But we are almost till 2:30 and at the end of our meeting, and that brings us to the end of our agenda. Want to just pause though to see if anyone has any questions before we sign off. All right, hearing silence, we will call that a wrap on our October 25 Healthy School Meals for All meeting. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Nathan, for your wonderful presentations. Thank you, Stacy and Caitlin, for leading this meeting. We wish you all a great month. And if you do have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out. Take care.